builder.
This is the Godox LD150R, costs about $1,000 and a little bit more if you want additional modifiers like softboxes. It's a super powerful RGBW panel that puts out more light than an Aputure 120D because of its lensed LED nature. It's got all the normal color stuff like CCT, HSI, preset color gels, as well as special effects. If you want to use a V-mount battery, you need to make sure your battery can handle over 10 amps. There's a fan inside that you can turn off, and here's what it sounds like in normal filming situations. Do I recommend it? Yes, because of its power being significantly brighter than the Aputure 120D. This is literally the Aputure 120D of LED panels. I literally attempted a 3-point lighting setup that I will show you right after this.
Done. Roll that intro.
Hey, what's going on everybody? You're watching Too Long Didn't Read Filmmaker. You're probably wondering what I'm doing here in the dark. Well, that's because today's panel is so powerful, I wanted to see if I could do a 3-point lighting system with just one light. So here we go. Here we are. Now, the light is actually behind me. It's not in front of me. It's got the honeycomb grid on it so that I can focus the light towards this bounce that's giving me my key light. There's just enough residual that's hitting the bounce board over here to give me a fill. Now, the residual kind of sort of gives me a rim light. It's not a perfect rim light, but it's sort of there. And the LED panel that is doing all this is none other than the Godox LD150R series. This is a new series. This is a super, super powerful panel. And let's go through all the normal stuff, the tests, and then I'm gonna try to convince you why I believe this is kind of like the Aputure 120D of LED panels. So without further ado, let's get started. The LD150R is a large rectangular panel. They do make a square version if that's what you'd prefer. As you can see, this is significantly larger than a standard budget panel and pocket LED, getting into the territory of something like an Arri Skypanel. Now, the build quality is very solid, with a bulk of it being aluminum for the LEDs to exhaust heat. There is a fan inside to help dissipate more heat if needed. Now, the LD series does come with modifiers outside of the included barn doors that can be purchased separately or in a bundle. We have the honeycomb grid to focus the light and a softbox with a grid attachment if you need to soften the light on the go. Now, the control panels have quite a few buttons, including presets that you can save into its own memory banks. The dials are dual purpose, so they do act as buttons as well. On the bottom of the panel, we have our power and DMX ports, as well as a USB port for firmware updates that's starting to kind of show up in all of Godox's newer lights, which is definitely a plus. This panel does use the newer Godox Smart app, so you can control it wirelessly if you need to. One quick note about the V-mount battery is that you're going to need a high current or high load battery that can output more than 10 amps. Anything lower than that, the panel simply won't turn on, or it'll turn on and turn off right away. Under the menu system, we have your basic settings here, including wireless, DMX, and Bluetooth capabilities. You also have the ability to turn the fan on and off should you choose. We also have a lock button now. If you hold it down, it's going to lock all your settings so that no one can accidentally tamper with whatever it is that you have set up for the scene. Next up, we have the mode button, and this is where you're going to access what kind of colors you want to use, including some popular preset gels that this panel is trying to emulate. And of course, there are lighting special effects should you need it. You can choose the speed of it as well as a couple different modes. Now, I don't really use a whole lot of these at all, but it's there if you need it. Now, these panel dials are pretty self-explanatory, allowing you to control your dimness levels, your color temperatures, as well as the green and magenta shift. Now, one interesting part about the green magenta shift button is that depending on your dimness level, if you click on this button, it'll automatically put to where the panel believes the best green magenta shift value is so that your colors look nice. The CCT dial, when you click it down, will cycle through all your common Kelvin temperatures. And lastly, the dimness button, when you click on it, is going to strike the light on and or off. And without further ado, let's go over to the light output tests, as this panel does put out quite a bit of light with and without modifiers. When it comes to raw output, the LD150R panel is the brightest panel I have ever tested. We're seeing light output brighter than lights like the Godox UL150 series, and that's with the fan off. Part of this is because of the slight spot beam nature of this panel, but it's going to be a good light to have on set if you want to shoot it through a large sheets of diffusion. With the honeycomb attachment, we see a much more focused beam of the light without as much spill. We do take a slight hit in terms of light output, but still substantially more powerful than the Godox 150 class LED. This honeycomb will definitely come in handy if you're trying to control spill while shooting through diffusion. Now the softbox attachment will cut off a decent amount of light power while softening up that spot beam feel. Even with the softbox on, we are now finally getting closer to the 150 watt class LED territory, which to say you have a lot more options and a lot more headroom if you want to diffuse this light. Last but not least, we have the softbox grid option to try and control that soft light. Here we are seeing something closer to a 100 watt cob LED. Now keep in mind when I say these numbers like 150 watt or 100 watt comparisons, I'm talking about if there is no diffusion in front of it at all. So the fact that we can get these numbers with diffusion in front of the panel is excellent. Now, RGB colors on this LD150R is just absolutely insane. You'll have no problems throwing colors into your scene. However, because of the spot beam nature of the panel, if you wish to have more of a floodlight, you may or may not need to diffuse the light a little bit just so you can get a more even spread. In terms of color quality, we are seeing very standard end LED chips being used here, where the tungsten LEDs will generally cause the skin tones and the red to veer over towards yellow, while the daylight remains fairly accurate by all the color chips. For this test, I have both lights 2 feet away from the diffusion layer, and I'm standing 4 feet away from the diffusion layer. Now, while I don't have the actual Aputure 120D Mark II on hand, I used its closest competitor, the Godox UL150, which actually clocks in slightly brighter than Aputure's own 120D Mark II lab test. For all purposes, this will do as a useful substitute. My camera settings are above. I'm using my Sony ZV-1, which is a 1-inch sensor not really known for capturing low light stuff. I purposely have the ISO set at its native base ISO of 125, and I force the lens at f2.8, which is not the widest it can go. Now, as you can see, the Godox does come in brighter than the simulated Aputure 120D Mark II. Part of this is because of the more punchy spot beam, as my shadow side is actually more pronounced there back on the wall. At this point in time, you're probably looking at the graph and saying, well, there's really not that much of a difference between the two lights, so I might as well go for the cheaper Aputure 120D Mark II, right? Not necessarily, because even though the Godox is coming in approximately $200 more, remember, you're going to get bicolor capabilities, which unlocks the tungsten mode, and you also have the RGB capabilities at very high power. So when you really think about it, the extra $200 is giving you a lot more color options, which is why I am saying this is the Aputure 120D of LED panels, because it's so highly versatile. So what's the bottom line here? Who is this light for, and do I recommend it? Now, in this bottom line, I'm specifically only going to be talking about the 150 model, not the 75, because there's only a $200 difference, and the 75 is at 75 watts instead of 150. So if that $200 actually translates to basically double the amount of output or close to, I would rather that I save a couple months and pay that extra $200 to get the more output. Now, if it was actually half the price at, say, $500, then we'd be having a different conversation. But only a $200 difference versus a $500 difference, I think it's worth it to save up. So without further ado, do I recommend this panel? Yes. Who do I recommend this panel to? It's basically people who have used a bunch of budget LED panels and are now needing more power and not necessarily carrying around a whole bunch of panels. This is them upgrading up without spending something like $5,000 some dollars for something like the Arri Skypanel S30, which this one I feel is closely emulating in terms of the raw amount of power that comes out of it, and as well as the color options should you get the S30 color options. So that being said, when you're taking into account how much output you're actually getting compared to budget LED panels, you're flooring the budget LED panels by a big shot. And if you need color, same thing. You're getting a whole lot of output of color. So if you're going to splash colors back there or really try to get some moodiness into your scenes, this is definitely going to do much better than just the budget LED panels. And because of you having all that output, you are now more free to do a lot more modifications. And specifically speaking, whether you're going to be bouncing it into a big reflectable, they call it book lighting, if you want to reflect it off of that kind of surface and bounce everything back, or if you are shooting through a large sheet of diffusion like 8x8, 4x4, this is also going to help you. The only thing that I would say is if you're trying to get like that hard shafts of light where you really need to focus down, that's where cobs come in. And I know that in the beginning I said, I really believe that this is like the Aputure 120D of LED panels. So I feel like you guys might be asking me this question. Okay, if it's this versatile, which one should I get? In theory, you should be getting both because both lights serve very different purposes in terms of what kind of light quality you want. Now, while they both can actually get pretty close to one another in terms of overall looks, the way you modify it is very, very different. So I'm going to say ideally you should get both. But you're saying, okay, but I really need to know. I only have budget for one or the other as I'm slowly building up. So which one should I get first? In which case, there's only one thing you truly need to ask yourself is, what do you do on the daily? If you need color, and I mean you're going from daylight to tungsten to RGBs, if you're doing anything with color work, then I would say probably just get the LD150 first, just because it's much easier to get what you need and you don't have to bring gels and trying to figure out the right amount of saturations while you're on set, and you can modify as needed in terms of diffusion in front of it and trying to get what you need. If you don't work with color at all and you're primarily using daylight already and you just want to supplement the panels that you got or the budget cobs that you got, then I would say get the more high-powered cob. Because it's more high-powered, you are able to shoot it through larger pieces of diffusion, or you can quickly just put on a softbox and get your diffusion that way, depending on what you need. And also just the fact that you may or may not already have the modifiers you used on your lower powered cobs. So whether they be some strip soft boxes, or maybe you got some snoots, some Fresnel attachments, what have you. If you already have that stuff and you just need more power, then it's a no-brainer. Go ahead and go for the cob because you're already working in that environment anyways. And hey, that is it for this week, everybody. If this video has made all the influence in your purchasing decisions, I would truly appreciate it if you check out my Amazon affiliate links down below. Again, this costs nothing extra to you, just gives me a little compensation so I can continue making videos like this for you. And as always, if you have any questions or comments, go ahead and leave it down below. I will get to them as fast as I can. And until then, like, subscribe, and share, and I'll see you guys in the next one.